Angel Gurria, thank you for joining me on UpFront. The UK is about to vote on Brexit, on whether to quit the European Union and the EU's single market, the biggest single market in the world. You, the OECD, have talked about a Brexit tax, which the UK would have to pay in the form of, I think, 3% lower GDP, you said. The UK's Finance Minister, Chancellor George Osborne, has warned Brexit would force him to deliver an emergency budget to raise £30 billion in tax rises and spending cuts. Do those figures look about right to you? And are you worried that such a new round of austerity could trigger a recession in the UK?
Frankly, it's bad from every single angle. You know, the London School of Economics, the Confederation of British Industry, the Treasury, the OECD, everybody's looking at it from different angles. And the one common thread is it's negative, it's negative, it's negative, it's negative. We said it's like a tax, but it's starting to count now. Already Brexit is happening in the sense that it's costing, the uncertainty is costing low growth.
Capital flight.
Capital flight and low growth in the last quarter, etc. And then there's another question. Is it, why would you give up, let's say, about a month's equivalent of revenue in a household, average household in the UK, £2,000 to £5,000 per year, depending on whether it's now or 2030, for nothing in return. You know, nothing. When they say pay a tax, that's in order to get, you know, something, pavement or to get security or whatever. Here you get nothing in return. Why should you pay a tax to get nothing in return?
And just to be clear on my question, do you worry that there is a risk of the UK going into recession, as some economists have warned, post-Brexit?
There will be a number of very negative consequences. I'm not sure if it would go into a recession, but the problem is we're sure that it would leave a few percentage points of growth per year, but also over the years. There's absolutely no logic in the whole approach. Some politicians maybe are trying to profit, advance their careers at the expense of, but it's at the expense of the next generation. It's not even about the referendum. It's the next generation.
They would argue, of course, that they're going to still be able to trade and that they will get money back from all the budget contributions they'll save on, etc., etc.
It's 0.3% of the GDP. It's nothing. They're going to lose a lot more than they're going to save by saving those
and the continent-wide effects, because this is not just about Britain. Do you worry that Britain pulling out of the EU will lead to an unravelling of the European Union as a whole, with all the knock-on effects on continental growth, global growth?
It is mostly going to be about the UK. The unraveling may be because, you know, Scotland wants to stay in the EU, whereas the rest of the... So it's mostly about the UK. Now, there's going to be a knock-on effect in Europe. And in the world, because the last thing we need is an injection of uncertainty at this stage where we're dealing with so many other sources of uncertainty. But the question is mostly about the UK. So it's about, you know, don't shoot yourself in the foot.
Okay.
There's absolutely no reason.
Just moving on from the specific pros and cons of the Brexit debate, why do you think it is that UK voters, 2/3 of those who support leaving the EU and 1 in 4 of those who support staying in, tell pollsters they don't trust the experts anymore when it comes to the economy? They don't trust the OECD or the IMF or the Bank of England. How has an organisation like the OECD, like so many other major organisations, become distrusted as an elite institution, its expertise research ignored? Because of the leaders of the Leave movement are not appealing to facts or figures. They're appealing to emotions, and they're misleading public opinion. You know, one of the things that is often repeated is we're stifled by the regulations. Well, actually, Britain was one of the least regulated and best regulated of the economies of the OECD. We measure that, we compare that. So that means you can be perfectly well an EU citizen, you can be a part of the EU, and have your own regulation, choose your own regulation. It also suggests that there's very little marginal advantage that the UK can win in terms of regulatory flexibility. You're in the United States right now promoting a new report that the OECD has done on the state of the US economy. You say in the report, 7 years after the financial crisis, the US economy has rebounded. There's been a comeback, you say, in terms of growth, employment, corporate profits, and yet you have voters in the United States who say they're not feeling any of those benefits, and they're therefore angry at the political, economic, financial establishments. You recognize that?
Not only do I recognize that, we have measured the fact that inequality is now greater. And in fact, let's say, how do you measure inequality? Well, how about measuring the income of the lower 10% in terms of the income of the highest 10%? Okay, so it's about 10 times on average in the OECD. In the United States, it's almost double. So you're talking about a much higher inequality, and the inequality is found not only in terms of countries to country, it's found in region to region. Sometimes it's found even within the same city.
Any discussion these days about the state of the global economy, the US economy, the European economy, does tend to involve a reference to rising inequality, specifically income inequality. The OECD says, as a whole, OECD countries have income inequality that are at their highest levels for the past half century. You've said income inequality is now at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point on this subject. What would you say to your critics who say it's precisely the neoliberal free market policies advocated by the OECD in the past and now, deregulation, privatization, austerity, balanced budgets, it's those policies which have produced the record gap today between the richest 10% and the poorest 10%?
Unfortunately, even before the crisis, inequality was growing, but then the speed accelerated very dramatically. And we now have a situation where we have to address inequality as a specific target issue. It's not going to be taken care of by itself simply because we're going to have more growth. And then, of course, inequality will take care of itself. We need to target taxing policies, education policies, skills policies. That's a very critical
So are you
variable.
conceding the criticism that OECD policies in the past, neoliberal policies, deregulation, privatization, austerity, helped exacerbate the inequality crisis?
No, what happened what happened is, again, the crisis was created by the subprime, was created by the...
But I'm talking about inequality more broadly, which you admitted happened even before the crisis.
It destroyed millions and millions of jobs in the process.
But inequality is a long-term trend.
Yes,
I'm talking about over the last 30, 40 years.
Inequality is a long-term trend that accelerated.
Agreed. We accept acceleration. But over the course of 30 years...
what we're looking at is how do you address the question of inequality in the context of a very sluggish recovery.
But how do you also address it in the context of policies which aren't changing? Let me give you an example. A recent research paper by economists at the IMF, at the International Monetary Fund, not known for being kind of communist or socialist firebrands, they said the costs of the neoliberal agenda in terms of increased inequality are prominent, and the benefits in terms of increased growth seem fairly difficult to establish. That's a pretty damning assessment of the kind of policies that the IMF and the OECD have been advocating for decades.
We have been advocating now for some time, by the way, that we should depart from merely the fiscal consolidation, meaning more austerity, more reduction of the deficits, and expand investment, public investment in certain well-chosen, high multiplier, high impact infrastructure projects.
Do you agree that some of the policies you've believed in and advocated in the past were mistaken? They exacerbated this inequality crisis.
The question is, did you have choices?
No. That's my question. Do you accept that any of your previous views and policies?
Your question.
It's a very simple question. Do you think you got anything wrong?
But your question suggests that there were choices. After the crisis, there were no choices. You had to have.
Before the crisis, there were choices. No one forced Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan to bring in privatization.
The crisis, the world was growing. The world was flat.
Inequality was growing, as you conceded.
But
inequality was also growing.
And then the crisis
gradually
advanced.
Since the 80s and 90s.
The crisis advanced the inequalities in 3 years more than it had done in the 12 years before.
But there was inequality growing beforehand in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
I'm asking you, like the IMF researchers, do you concede that policies you supported contributed to that?
All
it's a very simple question. Yes or no?
Saying is that you have choices. And the question is, after the crisis, you did not have choices, okay? And now
You've made that point. I'm just asking if you concede you got anything wrong.
Now you have choices again.
We're running out of time. I know you have to go. Just before we finish, as a former foreign minister and finance minister of Mexico, do you think a President Trump could succeed in making Mexico pay for his proposed wall? He says he'll force Mexico to do it via trade tariffs and visa cancellations. Realistic?
I would not even like to entertain the notion that we should or should not pay for this rather crazy idea. This is hopefully not going to happen. So let's not speculate on who's going to pay for it, because it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen because he's not going to win, or he's not going to build a wall because it's a mad idea?
It's not going to happen, period.
Okay. And as a Mexican, do you think Donald Trump's remarks about Mexican immigrants being criminals and rapists, his claim that a US judge of Mexican heritage is biased against him, do you think those are racist remarks? I had Vicente Fox on the show recently, who dominated you for the OECD job. He said he's absolutely a racist. Do you think those remarks are racist remarks about Mexico?
I think I would tend to agree with those who say that this is, not only misinformed, but yes, I think the word racist can be applied. But the other thing that is happening is that the American public has already, in the last few days, made clear what they think about this. As you saw today, I'm speaking about facts, there was a double-digit distance between the two candidates after these remarks and after these statements. I think they were particularly, unfortunate. They will have their consequences. I am the Secretary-General of the OECD, and as such, I have to remain neutral, but I'm first and foremost a Mexican, and I obviously resent very much these kinds of statements. As I said, they're misguided, they're ill-informed, and I think that because the American public is wise, it will then act in consequence.
Angel Gurria, thank you very much for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you.